Okay, I'm gonna start off by apologizing that this dropped late after I told you we'll be back to some kind of consistency. That's my bad. Summer months are hard because people do things, and I had taken an extended vacation off of work from Thursday to Sunday and just, vegetated. That's on me. There was plenty of opportunities to record a podcast. I chose not to, so I chose to do it real quick during my lunch break on Monday. So, my bad for being inconsistent, but hey, I still got it out on today, Monday, insert date. See what I did there? Just in case I recorded this a week later. Or maybe, when did I record this? Anyway, I thought today would be a better day to talk about something a little less heavy, since the last two were kind of gut punches, and the last one was, from what I reviews stated, your podcast about anxiety gave me anxiety. And that to me is the highest form of compliment of what I'm trying to do for a podcast. Because if I can give you anxiety while I'm talking about anxiety, then you have truly felt how I felt during my experiences with anxiety, and I think that's a win. It's not a nice win. It's kind of a dick move on my part, but hey, it happened. And if I was able to pull that off, I know that my words have reached somebody, even if it had a negative effect. Anyway, today I figured to talk about something lighter, something more. It's still personal, but at the same time, just kind of chill. And that's going to be my love of Star Wars. Now, I know what you're thinking. You geek out about Star Wars all the time on the Dace Man Show. You do pot of nerds about Star Wars, and you just nonstop talk about Star Wars. But I think talking about Star Wars as a topic for a Dacetacular Mind really gives you a glimpse into why I'm the way I am. So everybody has their Star Wars story. Everybody has who introduced it to them. They remember when the first movie they saw. And that's kind of what I want to talk about today, because it's lighthearted. It's a huge part of who I am, because as I sit here doing this podcast, I'm wearing an Obi-Wan Kenobi t-shirt. And it's just, God, Star Wars is just so good. Like, I don't know how people go through life without experiencing Star Wars. It's huge. You experience Star Wars without realizing you've experienced Star Wars, because it had such a huge impact. What George Lucas did with the original A New Hope, or just Star Wars Episode 4, whatever you want to call it, his original run back in the 70s, Lucas, Industrial Light and Magic is like everything. Everything you see. Like, I get a lot of flack, because I'm going to just put out some facts about yours truly that are probably astonishing, but I haven't watched the Indiana Jones franchise, which again is Lucasfilm, even though it was directed by Steven Spielberg, and has Harrison Ford, who Han Solo is one of my favorite characters of all time. And I have not seen Indiana Jones, but you don't have Indiana Jones without Star Wars happening. See what I'm saying? And there's a lot of people who've seen Indy who have not seen Star Wars. Go watch Star Wars. And I know you're probably yelling at your radio or whatever you're listening to right now saying, why aren't you watching Indiana Jones? Well, I've seen the first one. I'm working on it. I have a tendency that when people tell me I have to do something, I don't do it. And that, to me, is a topic for another podcast. However, we're talking Star Wars. So my first experience of Star Wars was probably at the age of, I gotta do math, 8 or 9. And my uncle Mike actually set me up to see Star Wars, because in 1999, George Lucas was bringing it back to the theater, baby, by bringing us what's called the prequels, which I think, in hindsight, people have lightened up on. I think it helps a lot that there was cartoon series, and, once he started doing some of this stuff, with the prequels, and then the sequels, a lot of what we watch and consume today allows for more storytelling within that universe, and it helped ease the picture over the years that the prequels aren't as hated as they were when they came out. But that was my first experience. Was my uncle on a VHS tape showed us the original trilogy, and like that was the coolest thing to me because I'm a nerd, and this is probably where it started. The whole nerdum, or at least the first point that I can remember, was watching these original three movies over at my uncle's, because then all of a sudden it was like, okay, now I gotta have the toys. Now I need a lightsaber. Now every video game that comes out for Star Wars, or the PlayStation 1, or yeah, I think PlayStation 1, because I don't remember having any Star Wars games for the Sega Genesis, but I remember for PlayStation it was like, okay, now I have to have the Jedi Masters of the fighting game. I think it's Karsiki or something like Kasuk. I had to have Jedi Power Battles. I had to have Star Wars Episode 1 for it. Like, this really was a turning point in my childhood / adulthood, because I'm still a huge man-child, that if there's something Star Wars, I need to do it, have it, or see it. And he introduced me to this through the VHSs. So, like, the untouched... this was before Lucas started doing remasters and found out what CGI was. And, like, the original format. Because I remember seeing the original formats. I've only seen them once. Because by the time I was being gifted the franchise, I got the VHS special editions. Where, you know, he went back and made it look like Han didn't shoot first. Added more creatures, added a few more minutes, adjusted some of the stuff. Like, you're going to find with Star Wars, he's tweaked it so many damn times that every time you're viewing it on a new platform or a new service, it's a completely different experience. And most of the time, it's not better. Like, some of the stuff made sense, like where they went back in Empire Strikes Back and added the Emperor in rather than the original, like, distorted. They used an actor who wouldn't end up playing the Emperor overall, which would be casted in Return of the Jedi and then followed through in the prequels. And they used, like, bamboo or baboon eyes on the like they really made this disfigured creature, and he went back and added that. So some of the edits, you know, kind of made sense or kind of cool, but some of it's just like, man, just leave it alone. And I got to see that version as a 8-year-old, 9-year-old kid. And my brother, who was like 5 or 6 at the time, my math is terrible, 7 or 8. He's 2 years younger. You do whatever the hell it was. He was 2 years younger than me. And we got to experience that in all its glory. And then we got to see Episode 1, The Phantom Menace, in theaters. And I remember the coolest things. Like the marketing for it, I remember very vividly that there was like a Lay's chips campaign, and you got cards. So like all of a sudden, I'm eating all kinds of freaking Lay's because I want all the cards from Episode 1. And you didn't know who any of these characters were. You knew who Obi-Wan was. It was explained to me who Anakin would be. But again, I think I'm like 10, 8, 9, or 10. Like, you're in a weird realm right there where things probably didn't stick and didn't make sense. And by the time they finished the prequels, I was ready to graduate high school. Because that came out in the summer of 2005, which means I was going into my senior year of high school. Anywho, I digress. I just remember being so like I had all kinds of action figures. I remember playing with these action figures. I had stormtroopers. I had the Jedis. I had the alternate universe stuff that's not canon anymore. Like the game Dark Forces was like huge. I remember playing that so many times. Like, Star Wars became life. Like, there was just everything I played with, everything I did, everything I imagined revolved around Star Wars. Like, I went down the nerd hole. I don't know if my brother did as much as I did, but I know for a fact that I fell down that hole, and I fell down that hole pretty hard. And that's awesome. I loved it. Like, every minute. I still love it. As a 32-year-old man, I'm trying my damnedest to get down to Orlando to go to the Galaxy's Edge, because I still want to experience that, because Star Wars to me is just... it's an amazing universe. I know people get that way with like Harry Potter or Lord of the Rings. I think a lot of people get into the Tolkien universe. Um, I know a lot of people are very big fans of Bond and the whole spy world. But Star Wars was it for me, man. And Star Wars really, it branched me into other nerdoms, from, we'll use that word, where I wasn't a big superhero kid. Granted, I think anybody in the 90s was probably an X-Men and Spider-Man fan because of the cartoons. But the way I'm a comic book fan now is not how I was a comic book fan back then. Meaning, I didn't have comics, I didn't read, I didn't go out to find the obscure stories, I wasn't running to the movies all the time for it, I didn't have all the Marvel games, I didn't have all that stuff. But Star Wars has consistently been that way for me. And it hasn't stopped. Like, perfect example, EA has kind of butchered the Star Wars thing when it comes to video games, but I buy it. I don't care. I'm gonna get it. It's Star Wars on the title. Gibby has made that comment on the Daysman show. If you put Star Wars on it, or it's Star Wars anything, I'm gonna see it. Fans were not thrilled with the Solo movie. I saw it opening. I remember being there, and it's like, I know I'm not probably going to enjoy this because it's not Harrison Ford, but I have to see it. It's Star Wars. And it's just some kind of weird dedication I have on my part because Star Wars was so influential on my life because it would shape who I am. I'm a big fan of Weird Al Yankovic. I think he shaped a lot of my personality and quirkiness. But even he had his hands in Star Wars. Some of my two of my favorite songs by him are Yoda, which is a parody of Lola, and then The Saga Begins, which is a parody of American Pie. So it's like, even the music that I was a fan of at the time was being influenced by Star Wars. So that's why I think you walk anywhere in my house, every room has some kind of Star Wars thing in it. I'm sitting at my desk right now recording this podcast, and I've got like 5 Star Wars figures under the one monitor. I've got a lightsaber in my drawer next to my bed because, just in case somebody comes through the door and I have to fight them. And there's all kinds of like figures, posters, just all through the house. And not just like originals, but originals, prequels, and sequels. Like, it didn't matter to me. Star Wars is Star Wars. And again, I know certain people have this kind of fandom when it comes to Harry Potter, Star Trek, James Bond, Tolkien, etc. And that's why I think it's so important to me to express that Star Wars influenced things. When I was a kid, and I would be playing with the action figures and living out Star Wars vicariously through little things of plastic, the dreams I would have, the short stories I'd write as a kid, or if I drew my own cartoon, or if I was asked to do a project at school, always leaned towards Star Wars. And by that I mean, either if it was allowed to be fictional, it was definitely going to take place in that Star Wars universe. If it had to be non-fictional, I would lean more towards space, because the space element of Star Wars always interests me as well. Like, here you are in a galaxy far, far away, and there's all kinds of alien races and just planets and just space travel. Like, all that stuff's pretty cool. Like, one of my favorite scenes in Star Wars is not only for just the scene itself, but like the music. John Williams is a god, and when we lose him, it's going to be a very sad day. But I digress. The scene where Han and Leia are in the Falcon, and they're trying to evade the Imperial forces in Empire Strikes Back through the asteroid field, which was so cool. And the music was amazing. The moves through the spaceship. Like, who doesn't want to fly the Millennium Falcon? It's just... it's one of the few things at that age, as well as... oh my god, I was going to put time to it, 2.5 decades later, can take you out of reality and like really submerge me into the fantasy behind it. Like a lot of stuff, like I feel in this day and age when it comes to movies, everybody's a very harsh critic. Not too many people go into movies now and or anything really, TV, and just enjoy it to enjoy it. And I do that with Star Wars. I sit back, I enjoy it to enjoy it. I'm a little overcritical on Marvel, super overcritical on DC. But with Star Wars, during that hour or 2 hours or the 45-minute cartoon, whatever it may be, I'm fully engrossed. I can't do other things while that's on. I can't not focus on every little detail, the music, the characters, the dialogue. Everything enamors me about Star Wars. Whereas, like, we'll throw some Marvel Disney Plus series in there, or that might be the best example, but just any other kind of format or form of media through a different content creator, I watch it. Certain levels of absorption happen, but it's not as engrossed as I am to Star Wars. The example I'll probably use is Loki. Loki I thoroughly enjoyed. Loki is what I've been waiting for out of Marvel for their Phase 2 or their Phase 4 to kick off Saga 2, I guess. I don't know what you want to call it. But I found myself thinking about other things, playing on my phone, still watching, but not as fully engrossed. Jump forward to a Friday where a Bad Batch comes out, which probably doesn't even need that much of attention. I am like glued to the TV for a cartoon that it's an episodic cartoon similar to the style of like the 90s and then late or early 2000s, where they're going to probably run about a 20 episode arc. I think it's 16, but they're running multiple episodes. So some of the episodes don't have critical information. They just have like, oh, we're on this mission this episode, but I'm fully into it. And I feel like the fact that I was so into it as a kid, and just every time Star Wars had something out, I had to have it, or I had to read it, I had to consume it. It's ingrained to me that on Fridays I sit there and I'm watching. Do not disturb me during the Bad Batch. Which is another interesting fact too, because I'm not much of a reader. I like reading comics. I like the pictures. I really enjoy the art more so than the reading aspect of it. I think usually when I'm looking over a comic panel, I'm looking more at the details of the art than I am the words. But because of this dedication and infatuation with Star Wars, I have an entire book series. Like anything that's currently considered canon in the Star Wars universe, from a novel standpoint, I own it. I went out and got it. I started collecting them. It's like there are more details about these characters that I see on the screen that I need to know about. I read all the comics, and now I have these books, and again, very hard for me to concentrate on a book because there's no pictures, and that sounds really childish, but again, comic panels speak to me more than just give me a 300-page book and let me read word for word, because I guess I'm just more visual than I am reading. Reading just bores me. I don't know what it is. It just bores me. That even sometimes in comics, I'm just looking at pictures and not really reading the story, especially if it's like details that don't matter. And I'll admit, reading one of the Star Wars ones that I started was part of the High Republic era, which is set 200 years before Episode 1 and The Phantom Menace. I almost checked out real quick. Well, I'm not gonna lie, I did check out real quick because it was new characters. It was descriptions about a ship and being in space for almost 2 or 3 pages, and not really hooking me. So I moved on to another book. which is The Master and the Apprentice, featuring Qui-Gon and Obi-Wan, which, okay, these are two established characters I know I probably enjoy more. But the point I'm trying to make is, I own these books, I intend to read these books, I am reading these books, but no other kind of franchise makes me do that. Like, if Marvel pushed out a book, like a novelization of Avengers Endgame, which fills in some of the details. Like, let's just say put out a novel, and it covered Captain America's journey back to deliver the stones. I'm not going to be so inclined to go read that. I'd rather wait for somebody to tell me. But with Star Wars, I want to go find out what's happening with these characters. I want to know what it was like for Qui-Gon to teach Obi-Wan. I want to read the 3 book series about Thrawn, Admiral Thrawn, who is a huge character in the comics. He was a legacy character that did get canonized at some point. And even the book about Tarkin, and the side missions that the Emperor and Vader were on, and then what Luke did after Return of the Jedi. Like, these are all things I want to know and actively seek out. Playing the storyline in Battlefront 2, which shows you a stormtrooper who doesn't agree with what the Emperor is doing, and then you come cross paths with Luke Skywalker. Like, that stuff to me is so cool. Whereas I don't really invest in that. And I think it harbors back to when I was a child. This is being the first thing I invested in. I think that's huge, too, when it comes to these type of franchises, that people would like, I want to watch it. A perfect example. Just perfect example from a personal experience. Bond. I saw Spectre when it came out in the theater, and I know nothing about James Bond. I know there's like 20 other movies. I think I would enjoy all 20 movies. The problem I have is I'm 20 movies out. So it's hard for me to invest in that universe not knowing it. I'm currently trying to go through Star Trek. I think Star Trek suffers from something that TV suffered from back in the 90s, 80s, 2000s, where sitcoms and dramas were expected to go 20 to 23 because that just was the industry standard. And the plot, or like an overall story arc for what they were doing, wasn't so much the central focus, that you would have maybe 4 or 5 episodes of just filler of like missions that kind of get repetitive after a while, and then like the 6th episode is like, that is a huge character development for so-and-so and has implications on the movies. So I'm a little hung up on The Next Generation right now because of that. Whereas Star Wars, I hit the ground running. I know I was 30 years late only because physically I was born after after Return of the Jedi was released. Didn't get exposed to it until like a year or less before Phantom Menace came out. But at that point, there was 3 movies. There was the Dark Horse comic series and all that other extended universe stuff that was out there. But I was also young, and that was something I grabbed onto and ran with. Similar to Pokemon. I mean, eventually you fall off Pokemon at a certain generation, if you're me. But to hit the ground at like the entry level, it's like, okay, well, you got to watch these 3 movies, and then we'll go back and watch this movie. And then this movie spawned off some games you got to play, and here's some comics you can read, and then Disney buys them, and then there's an entire fucking universe. And I'm able to keep pace with that. Same way with people who keep pace with the MCU. The MCU is, for all intents and purposes, its own thing. It's nice to have some comic book knowledge. I think sometimes it's a curse to have that comic book knowledge, because you expect one thing, and then the studio decides to do something else, and then you're mad. It is bothersome to a point that you have an idea of what a character looks like, or have experienced that character for, when the MCU started, 70 years. The character's been this way, and then they go, yeah, you know what? Stark isn't going to be a huge womanizer and alcoholic. We're going to tease it a little bit and then have him kind of redeem himself fairly quick. Half of the mess-ups that Stark does is from alcohol, or just poor decision made off of the fact that he's always drunk. And I get why you don't do that as a studio, but I'm just saying that coming to the ground level at MCU, it's easier to absorb that all if you're not a comic fan. or because you were there for the first Iron Man and have just watched the movies as you go along, and now we have TV series. You got in with it at the ground level, and I consider myself, again, I get that I'm 20 years late to the show, but I considered myself at a ground level when I entered in Star Wars. I was exposed to 3 movies. I was able to watch the 4th movie in the theater, and have grown up with it ever since. And the cool thing was, I went for more. If there was an opportunity to learn more about Star Wars, I took it, being that young. So, like, I think it's comparable for kids today, and I go back to the MCU. If you were a kid when in 2008 when this came out, you would be having a podcast at age 32 talking about how MCU shaped who you were as a person. And that's why I think Star Wars ultimately shaped who I am. Everything I enjoyed, like, oh, you want to go to this? Or there's this Star Wars thing going on. I'm going to Star Wars night. Hands down. Like, Star Wars will always win. It's the Force, baby. But I wanted to point out, because like a lot of things are associated with people that you think, oh, ducks. This guy loves ducks. And you automatically think of the person who likes ducks. I want people that when they think about me, it's automatically Star Wars. Because to me, Star Wars is my better wheelhouse. Or stronger wheelhouse, I'll say. I love Marvel. I love everything Marvel's done. But Star Wars was the first love. And you never forget your first love. It's like the romantic way to put it, I think. But I also wanted to do a light episode. So I figured I would talk about Star Wars in all its glory. And how much of an impact it had on me as a person. Who probably talked around in circles a bit. But, yeah. Like, Star Wars is it, man. And I know everybody has their it. There are sports guys, there are car guys, and then there's Star Wars guys. And I am a Star Wars guy, hands down. I'm a nerd overall, but Star Wars will always prevail as the number one nerd thing I love. And then we'll probably dive deeper in at some point to talk about Mr. Weird Al Yankovic, because there's a guy who has a huge catalog of songs, parodies a bunch of songs, and for some reason I know word for word all of his stuff and the originals. It's crazy. But Star Wars was definitely the tipping point, the fondest memory I have as a kid when it comes to a franchise. I would say, if you look at 3 things that probably influenced me as a kid, Star Wars is probably the top tier, because I hit everything Star Wars, man. I can't even describe to you the amount of and the severe disappointment that these are all missing. But the Star Wars action figures I used to have, so many. I had the weird creatures. I had like the banthas. I had everything. And I don't know where they are. And then like Weird Al Yankovic clearly shaped my music tastes. You know, one kid got a Weird Al CD, the other kid got an Eminem series CD, and if you know both of us, you know how that turned out. If he's listening, you know too. What did you think was going to happen when you were singing on The Real Slim Shady and I was out there singing Another One Rides the Bus? Come on. And the third one would be Sonic. Everybody knows my love for Sonic the Hedgehog. It was a game that I got good at. I was able to beat. I still play to this day. I play it over and over and over again. I don't think I've ever beaten the original Super Marios, but I love those. But I've beaten Sonic. I have gotten Super Sonic, Super Tails, Super Knuckles. Like I have played those games inside now. But Star Wars, I have definitive memories of going to see each one, who I went to see it with. I saw episode 1 with my uncle and my grandmother. I saw episode 2 with a few friends for a birthday party. And I saw episode 3 several times. I believe with friends. But like that also I was 17. I was going to be 17. Yeah, I was 16. They were driving. I had a learner's permit because I'm a prodigy, or just, birthday falls weird. But I remember seeing that. I remember episode 7, 8, and 9. We started going to Atlantic City and made it an event for the sequel trilogy. All my friends went down there. 8 and 9 I shared with my ex-girlfriend at the time, as well as Rogue One, Solo. That was 4 movies we would go to AC on because it was Star Wars. Spent the whole night down there. Got the drunk slushies. It was a thing. Star Wars is integrated in life. You would go to see the Marvel movies on opening night. Star Wars, we went opening night in Atlantic City in IMAX. Got a hotel. It was a thing. Still is a thing. New Star Wars movies come out. I'm heading down to AC, IMAX, friends who now have kids, so I don't know that'll happen. The kids of the friends, they're coming too. But Star Wars has definitely shaped who I am. I'm glad that it was able to be the thing that shaped me. Could have been worse. I'll take it being a nerd and having kids that are nerds over other things any day of the week. I'm awkward, so I wasn't going to be a sports guy. But Star Wars is fundamentally who Chris Dace is when it comes to geeking out. Hardcore geeking out. I think, as a man who's not very religious, if I were to believe in one, it would be the Force. Hands down. And kind of like the Jedi Code, I don't believe the whole celibacy thing. I don't think they do either, considering, well, that's Anakin's downfall, was he found some good girl to get attached to. But even Obi-Wan faltered. I'm assuming Qui-Gon did. Qui-Gon was kind of against the rules. And Grogu, there's only 3 of that species in the universe. One was a male Yoda. The other one was a female Yodel. Or Udel. I forget what the hell her name was in episode 1. And then we have a baby Grogu. So, just throwing that out there. I think Yoda even had sex. And that is a perfect way to end this episode. So, again, I'm sorry that I dropped this late. I hope this was a lot lighter and a lot more... I hope it was interesting, in a way. I just kind of ramble on about my man crush on George Lucas and the Star Wars universe. But I think it also kind of explains a lot about who I am as a person, because Star Wars definitely influences decisions I make. Subconsciously. I wouldn't say... I don't walk up to a taco stand and go, what is the Force telling me to do here? That's not the case. But I think the fact that I was exposed to Star Wars at a young age, loved Star Wars, ran with Star Wars, you now have this weird goofball that I am at age 32, who often understands that when he goes angry, you are leaning towards the dark side, man. And I've had those moments. But thank you for tuning in to another Dacetacular Mind. I'll be back next week, hopefully on time, dropping relatively... Well, we usually drop at midnight on the day of. This is dropping probably 4 p.m. on the Monday. And we'll probably dive into something deeper again next week. Depends what the topic will be. I don't know. I like to just come up with the topic before I hit record. This way it comes out natural. Unless I'm talking about something pivotal in my life, such as the OTW or the Daceman show. I want to have the facts lined up, and I'm going to talk about a historical context. Not, Star Wars is my favorite thing. I like to talk from the hip on that one. But check out everything going on at Basement Protocol Productions. It's at the BPP Official on Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, and YouTube are Basement Protocol Productions. And we have a website. I think good things are coming. I enjoy doing this podcast. I'm back on the Daceman show after we got past the New York trip. And hopefully you enjoy taking these Monday trips with me into my brain of despair and weird and just verbal diarrhea. But yeah, you just got a glimpse into a Dacetacular Mind again. And hopefully I'll see you again next week. Bye!